So just talk us through what happened. You know, you're in Qatar, it's Wales's first match, you're in your hotel room or wherever you're staying, getting ready for the match, and you, of course, put on your bucket hat.
Yeah, well, Bore da, good morning, first of all, Sophie. Yes, I mean, look, I think the first thing to say is it wasn't just me that was in that predicament. I mean, I've had a louder voice because of my role here. I'm an ambassador for Wales, for the Football Association of Wales and the Welsh Government, so I guess I've had a bigger platform. But there were others in the same position. There were several friends and colleagues of ours who'd had their hats removed and confiscated, or indeed in a couple of cases thrown in the bin, which is pretty insulting. And of course the reality is we were told by FIFA before the tournament that rainbow attire and rainbow symbols would be permitted inside the stadiums, quite rightly so too. So to be perfectly honest, I hadn't really thought that there would be any kind of issue with entering the stadium. You know, we were doing this in a respectful way, but we were making clear the values that we stand for as a nation. And for us in Wales, you know, we're the smallest country represented in this World Cup that's actually qualified, and it was really important for us to use our role in the World Cup as a platform to show what we're all about as a nation, and that's about human rights for everyone, and not excluding the LGBT community from that. So that's partly why it was so disappointing, rather than the personal intimidation.
What exactly did they say to you? I'm just intrigued. You know, when they stopped you, and you can see the video there of that happening, what was the reason that they gave?
Well, we'd had word passed back to us in the queue that some of our colleagues from the FAW and other fans had issues with their rainbow hats. So a couple of us who were standing together sensed that something was likely to happen, but obviously we weren't prepared to take our hats off. You know, as I say, it's an important emblem, if you like, for our commitment to human rights and equality for all. But when I went through the security scanners and I came through the other end, one of the female security guards pointed to my hat and said, "Take off." And I said, "Why?" You know, I have to emphasise, we were being really polite in all of this. There was no point at which we tried to seek any confrontation. I asked why, and she simply replied, "Regulation." So I asked, which regulation? Because obviously, you know, I work with the FAW and I'm involved with UEFA, so I do know the regulations, and she couldn't really answer. So another lady came forward and said the same, "Take hat off or you can't enter the stadium." And again, I asked why, and they simply came up with the word regulation. So, I mean, I stood my ground. I just said, "I don't know what you're referring to." But by then, a male, I think he was some kind of security manager, came round and pointed again to the hat and said, "If you don't take that off, you don't come inside the stadium."
You say, you know, you obviously did stand your ground, and you are someone who, you know, you're a former captain, you are an ambassador, you're someone in a position of some authority, but it must have felt quite intimidating.
Well, it wasn't the best experience I've had of going into a stadium, and you know, I've been, as well as being involved in football, I'm a fan first and foremost. You know, I've been to Wales games since I was a toddler, and it's, you know, it's a pretty unsavoury start to what was the biggest game in our country's history. You know, we haven't been in a World Cup, as you know, for 64 years. So I was looking forward to going in with my friends and my colleagues from the Football Association of Wales to support the national team. So it wasn't ideal, but there's so much else that I think we have to stand up for in a country like Qatar. You know, we know, all of us who are here are horribly compromised by the political regime here. We know that, you know, there have been such dreadful issues around migrant workers. We know that women don't have basic rights as they do in the West. We know as well that LGBT people are criminalised. And so I think, you know, for those of us who live in countries like Wales, where obviously those rights are protected and promoted, you know, it is incumbent on us as well to stand our ground and to show that, you know, LGBT rights are human rights. And the other thing I'd say actually is that, you know, people have said to me, I think mostly we've had great support for our stand, but if anyone was trying to be critical, they've said, you know, are you not disrespecting local cultures and norms here? But I think there's a really important point there, which is this isn't a Qatari World Cup. This is the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, and FIFA is the organising body for this, and they assured everyone that everyone would be welcome, that it was a World Cup for the whole world, whoever they are and whatever their identity, and of course the advice and guidance around rainbow symbols reflected that. So I think, given all of that, it was really important that we stood up to some pretty heavy-handed security within the stadium.
It's interesting you talk about people making that argument, and on this programme, I've asked government ministers about it, and they've said that it's important for people to respect the laws, in their words, of the host country. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think that the UK government should be a bit stronger, I guess?
Well, it's a very delicate balance, isn't it? I think there's an issue over awarding major events to countries that can't guarantee basic human rights. And that's one for FIFA, obviously. But I mean, we have to live our values whilst we're here, and I've had nothing but support from our government in Wales and indeed from the Welsh public. And I think there's lots of people at home who are trade unionists, who are feminists, who are LGBT people or activists or allies. And they felt very uncomfortable about coming to Qatar. So those of us who are here in a work capacity have a duty, I think, to speak up for them and to show that, that there is an alternative equality, if you like, in our countries, which I think is really important, because otherwise, how do we ever have conversations about change? And, I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone in Qatar, but I think the very fact that we've been able to highlight this issue, Qatari people and other nations have talked to us as Wales fans wearing our rainbow hats. They've talked to us about what we're about and what those symbols represent. And in a sense, that's what a major international sports tournament has to be about as well, because there's no doubt at all in my mind, that it's nonsense to suggest that politics and sport are separate. They're not. And that's the reason why the World Cup is here in the first place, of course. So equally, you can't then remove politics once we come to a state like Qatar and expect us not to be true to the values that are important to us in Wales and of course in England and in other countries which have much more progressive attitudes to this.
And fair play to you as well for, doing this interview. You're there in Qatar and you are, sort of taking on, if you like, some of those prejudices by giving us your view as well. Players have been registering their protests in different ways. You had some teams, for example, covering their mouths to show that they couldn't say what they wanted to. But they've stopped short of, wearing the rainbow armband and taking the yellow card as punishment. Do you think there should have been a bit more, I guess, coordinated action? We had Greg Dyke on the programme earlier. He said that, look, if people had been a bit more organised, all of the European teams, for example, coming together saying that they would have worn the rainbow armband, then actually they'd have just had to swallow it.
Well, I think there's a few things to say there. I think it was fundamentally wrong of FIFA to intervene in the players' environment on match day. I mean, that's unforgivable. The players are here to play football, and whatever the issue, there shouldn't be conversations with players about what they wear on the field of play on the day of a match or hours before kick-off, which of course is what FIFA did with England and indeed with us in Wales. I think we'll have to reflect on this when we get back, because I know that Gareth Bale, the Wales captain, was extremely keen and enthusiastic to wear the One Love armband. He felt it was an important reflection of the stuff that I've been talking about, really, what our nation is all about. But I think, you have to recognise as well that FIFA were threatening beyond red cards. They kept it an open-ended threat, from what I gather, that it could be beyond the yellow card. So who knows how that would have played out. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. It was putting the players in a really invidious position. We'll learn lessons from it, because I think in unity there's strength, and the 7 national associations, those who've got progressive equality approaches, should have probably thought about a plan B or what might happen given we hadn't had a formal response from FIFA about the One Love armbands. But we will reflect on that, certainly in Wales, where these matters are very, very important to us. But I have to say, as a former player myself, on match day, the attention of players should be on the biggest game in their careers. And for those Welsh players, they were the first players to represent Wales in a World Cup for 6 decades. And I know they wanted to do their best on equality issues, but it was very, very wrong of FIFA to put them in that position.
Talking about the biggest game of people's careers, Wales are, of course, playing England. I'm not going to ask if you're going to watch the game, because I certainly know the answer to that one. But do you think Wales have got a chance of beating England?
Well, of course we've got a chance, but we're going to have to play a lot better than we've played in the first 2 games. I think the fans will they won't be optimistic, but they'll still believe. I've spoken to a lot of my friends who are here who still think that we can get a result against England. We've got to hope, of course, that the Iran-USA game is a draw then. But, you know, we haven't beaten England for a long time, so we're due a win. But, you know, make no mistake, England are a great team. They've got strength in depth. They've got such quality on the bench. And at the moment, we're not firing on all cylinders. But things change very quickly in football. You know, if we go out and put in a performance, yes, we can beat them. But, you know, I think from most Welsh fans' perspectives, it's the performance now. We've been disappointed on the pitch for whatever reason. And I think if we can go out and play well and with real passion and energy against England, I think the result will come. But even if it doesn't come, the fans will be proud of the team and go home, you know, happy that we've shown what we're about on the world stage.
Great, thank you so much for being on the programme today. You know, you've been such a sort of strong voice for equality and for, you know, the values that you clearly hold very dear as well in Qatar, so thank you.